Dr. Wiedenfeld here to talk about Auteur Cinema. It's a fancy word for the filmmaker artist, which I'll explain in the second part. First, I want to kind of give a little bit of background on art film, and then at the end, I'll briefly survey some key auteurs of this era, 45 to 60-ish, and maybe look at an example. So going back, thinking about film as an art, one of the key areas for this was France in the 1920s. Since the end of the First World War, all kinds of artists got interested in the possibilities of film, and they were interested specifically in what they could do that was different than on stage. So when they called film a seventh art, they were differentiating it from theater, which might, often counted as part of poetry or literature. They're seeing cinema as something special and especially modern because of its technology, and trying to explore ways that you could use the camera we're in the silent film area, the camera and editing to do things that you can't do on stage. Now, part of what this interest in art, how it manifested was, and where it grew out of, was cinema culture of people, cinema clubs. This is not just normal theaters, but people with an artistic interest that are having their own little club to show movies that might not be released widely in the commercial theaters, and then writing and thinking about movies everywhere in the social media of its day, which was journals and magazines. One of the key ideas here was medium specificity. This is important for modern art in general, and thinking that artwork is about how the viewer how their senses are interacting with the artwork. So it's not just some sort of subject, some sort of story that's being told. It's about that sensual medium in between you and whatever character, situation, thing is in front of you. So here's an example of Cubist painting, and it's very flat. We're trying to think about how we see things, and how the flatness of the surface is, and the way that perspective creates illusion. All these things we're conscious of and thinking about, and this is an important aspect of how modern art is understood. It's been reflecting on its own medium and being aware of that medium and making things that are beautiful in that medium, beautiful in its flatness. That's the case of painting. This is just kind of a quick list of what the specific medium is for all these other arts. The motion of the body in dance. Sculpture is about the material, where painting is this surface. Cinema, the way that the 20s thinkers coined to talk about it was photogenie, the photogenic. And that was more of a focus on the object itself and how the camera could reveal its soul or its reality. When we get to auteurism, we're moving away from that. And so, first, maybe a more neutral way to think about what we have in cinema is that we have motion picture, and now we've added sound, that we're in the sound era. That's maybe important for having a new idea of what the specific medium is, because it's changed now that we have sync sound. And the focus is for the auteur, as the name suggests, we're not focused on the object of what the camera is seeing, what the camera is recording, but on who's behind the camera, the director, the auteur, and how they're interacting with this world. So let's go over this idea of the auteur. It's a French word. It just means author in French, but we're using it in English to mean the the artist of the filmmaking artist. Why don't we just call it the film author? Well, remember we were trying to differentiate from theater. And so we don't want to call it just a director or just a writer, because it's not the screenwriter. It's something more than that. It's somebody who's not just writing ideas about characters in a story. It's somebody who's thinking, it's an artist who's thinking about how to use the camera, how to edit, how to record sound that will be a part of the art. That stuff is not secondary. This is primary. So this is why we're using this French word rather than just calling it the film author or the director, or the screenwriter, or whatever. Nor is it just a producer like Cecil B. DeMille. He's a big producer, but well, a case could be made for him, but he would be an example of somebody who is in charge of the whole production, but where he also does not seem to be like the origin of the artistic ideas. He is just more of a like a business manager putting things together. I'm selling him short here, but just for the sake of the example, you see what I mean by filmmaker artist. It can't just be somebody who's managing this entertainment. Because there's not a lot things that are personal with big budget spectacles. It's about this artist who has a personal vision. Okay, to explain it a little bit more, let me just quick go over the theory of Andrew Sarris, which is it has a nice rule of thumb for deciding, okay, is this filmmaker an auteur, or are they just an entertainer? Okay, first, he says they have to be technically competent. They have to know how filmmaking, cinema works, if they're going to, be able to have creative expression in it. If it's just, somebody who's never worked a camera before or doesn't understand how microphones work, well, they're not really competent enough to create a expression that's specific for cinema. Or if it's just a writer in the same, who doesn't know anything about how cameras and editing and all that stuff works. So it's somebody who's competent and has authority over these kinds of choices in the film. So that's the technical competence. Second, there's some kind of signature style. There's a look of the film, and that look is not just random branding, but it's connected to the thinking and the feeling of the filmmaker. Here's the personal view is going to surface for our senses and how it feels, how it looks, how it sounds. So here, we're talking about art. The idea that it's a personal expression of the artist. It's not just a conventional style, not just a branding. Although, of course, a signature style can become a brand, can be used as a brand. It's more than just a marketing gimmick. There's some personality behind it, and that's where we get to the innermost idea here. He calls it interior meaning, also calls it soul, that there's a soul to what's happened. It isn't just, somebody who's a stylist, meaning that I like to use the camera this way and I like to edit that way, just for fun. This is just how I like it. These are my favorite ways. No, those stylistic elements, that signature, is related to some inner meaning, some soul, and here's where we get back to the story and the writing, that there's some sort of tension between what the story is about and the style and of how it is told. And of course, the meaning is, I'll talk about here in a second, the meaning is specific to cinema. And what that means is that you can't translate the meaning of this great art into clear statements. It's ineffable. This is what criticism's for, is try to indirectly talk about what the meaning is. But if you could boil it down to a statement, the meaning of this movie is it is difficult to grow up when you have an overbearing father or something like that. That's just a theme that alone doesn't count for this unique expression of what art is. And this is a general idea of art that comes out of Romanticism. That there's you can't express beauty in the kind of clear statement ways that you would in science or in a dictionary, and that the artist is a genius. There's a romantic idea that there's some special connection of the artist to nature, the cosmos, where the where the soul is coming from the in the work is not just not just some sort of program that they have of like, okay, I'm going to try and deliver this meaning, but that they are tapping into an important vision of a world, kind of like a prophet. They're a seer, and it's not just about them personally, but that their personality is connected to the cosmos, to truth in some special way. All right, so that's a little background on how this idea of auteur is coming out of Romanticism and modern art more generally. One of the questions that comes up, I'll just mention briefly, is that, okay, if let's say this one filmmaker is a genius, does that mean that everything they make is brilliant art? This is the idea of the corpus, that, well, if so-and-so is an auteur, everything they make is genius. That's one view. On the other hand, you might say, well, beauty is really about the work. And if there's one amazing work, then yes, there must have been genius in the filmmaker as they were making it. But they might make something else and it might not be a great work. You might have those signature styles and some of the themes, but it doesn't come all together the way it does in that single work. So that's an interesting question to ponder. Now, so that was kind of an overview of the general idea. Now let me shift to just kind of presenting you some names of some key auteurs. Now these are filmmakers who are making movies in the late 40s through the early 60s, and that are being recognized as auteurs at the time by critics who are coming up with this idea of the auteur. Serres is in the 60s, but earlier it's especially French critics. André Bazin is a key one at Cahiers du Cinema in France, and then a lot of other French critics who would then become New Wave filmmakers, who we'll talk about in a different lecture. But, the people that they're writing about are Orson Welles, Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, Howard Hawks, Douglas Sirk, to name a few Hollywood directors. There's this idea of the genius of the system here, that obviously movies are different from writing a novel or writing a play, where it can clearly be the expression of one artist. Here, in the case of cinema, we're in a very large collaborative art. So this is another reason that we're going to talk about auteur and not author, is that, the filmmaker, director is kind of managing and overseeing things. They're able to put their signature within this system, within this big collaboration. and within all the constraints of budgets and things that you might not face as a novelist or a poet. Okay, European auteurs, Jacques Tati in France, and Robert Bresson in France, Fellini and Antonioni in Italy, as well as the neorealists Visconti and Rossellini we've talked about, Bergman, Sweden. Really want to highlight him as a filmmaker who became famous for art films, and people said, "Oh, well, film can be an art." A lot of people in the the 60s, it was Bergman's movies that stood out to him, probably Persona most of all. Asia, Kurosawa in Japan, really the first Japanese filmmaker to be widely recognized abroad and to draw interest of many other people like Mizoguchi and Ozu. Satyajit Ray in he's Bengali, so India, Bangladesh. Important difference from Bollywood directors. He is coming out of the neo-realist tradition, or really from the poetic realism of Jean Renoir, the kind of French director who's really made the greatest films in the 1930s. Ray, I think, works with him and has especially this Apu trilogy is really important. Great films. Latin America, Luis Buñuel, who we've talked about. He's Spanish, and then he became surrealist, making avant-garde movies in France in the 20s and 30s. Then during the war, he goes to Mexico. Later in this era, he's going to come back to Spain and France, but he does a lot of work there too. All right, let's look at an example here. I'm just going to show one because it would take a lifetime to study all these people. Jacques Tati, one of my favorites because he's a comedian, and lots of times the auteurs, very, very serious artists are going to be into drama or kind of heavy satire. Tati is coming out of the tradition of mimes, similar to Chaplin, although he's definitely his own filmmaker and his own character. He, like Chaplin, he's going to, like Chaplin and other key comedians of the silent era, he's going to act in his in most of his films with the main character. Themes of this absurdity of modern life, and his character is Monsieur Hulot, Mr. Hulot. It's kind of weird to say in English. Maybe that's why it's a little bit funny in French. Didn't make a lot of movies, but all very distinctive in their styles, their themes, and definitely competent. So, okay, I found a couple examples here on YouTube. This is from Mon Oncle, My Uncle, a 1958 film. I'm going to let it play, and one thing about his style is that you feel the passing of time. Shares this a little bit with Rossellini and the neo-realists, and they call it the episodic nature. That here we're not driven by the plot; we're just kind of hanging out for a moment. We're in suspense, in suspense of not having a story. And so this is going. The idea is that it's going to draw you into looking and listening and being aware of the motion picture and sound in a way it's very simple techniques, but they are well thought through. It isn't random. Okay, I forgot to set up the story. So Monsieur Hulot, the character, he's the uncle, and he comes to this to visit his nephew and family relatives who are in this new suburban neighborhood in Paris. He's never been to a suburb like this before, and he's going to walk into the kitchen, I think, to get a glass of water, and he's going to be, he's going to encounter the modern kitchen in all its weirdness and absurdity. Drying rack, electric drying rack. Plastic. Plastic was new at the time. Okay, so I love how first he drops it and it doesn't break, which it's a little play with what you might expect with his character is a bit of a klutz, so that doesn't happen. And technique wise, very simple. Was there or there's just two camera setups here. He flips back a couple times. Not a lot of editing, but it gives us this wide view, and we're hearing the sounds and looking at what he's touching, and this is how it's bringing us in. It's not like there's some plot here where there's a revolver that was used for a murder that's hidden in the kitchen, and he's going to try and find it. And that would be a way that would draw you in through the story, and you just have the story in your mind. Here, we're just in the kitchen for no strongly driven purpose. I don't even think that we know beforehand why he's going in there, and and so this kind of exploration of space, which is important that we get that back angle of the outdoors that we see with back here, that the depth, here with the photography taking us out of the studio and into the neighborhood, while also focusing on these kitchen, which is even doubly strange now because it's actually old, whereas at that time it was new. Okay, so there's one example. Another example. This is from a later film, his biggest production called Playtime, from 1967. It's sort of a story about this new side of Paris where there's new office buildings and all these kind of new professionals and how they move about, and there's like a big cocktail party. Monsieur Hulot his character doesn't feature as big in it. We're just kind of looking at typical people, and of course there's Americans there. There's Americans who are business people, and they're part of this kind of new business, international global business scene, and the like corporate park and corporate city where everything's happening. And this is a new house that isn't even finished being made, where they're holding the cocktail party. And there's just one quick little moment in it. Okay, so what you have here is an American who's at the party, and this is just a just an offhand moment. It isn't related to the plot at all. And they're at a cocktail party. He's drunk. He's talking with some other guys. He looks over and he happens to see the way the visual form looks like Napoleon's hat. The chef probably doesn't notice it, but it's and Tati doesn't. You notice the dialogue, how low it was. Everything's like background here. There is no foreground. We're just in this mode of it's called playtime because we're playing as we watch, and we're spectating and observing things, kind of like people watching in a fun way about modern life. And that's just one little example of the kind of the technical competence of, obviously not a lot of fancy camera work here. It was just one long shot, but the framing, and actually I didn't point out the timing of how the waiter walks through and he grabs a little coaster from it, and there's a lot of motion and energy going on in the frame, even though the camera work is pretty minimalistic. Okay, so there's Tati. I think if you go down Sarris's list, the technical competence, even though it's minimalistic, he clearly knows what he's doing. Signature style, not only through the character, but through the longer shot, and especially the focus on like the background noises is what he's doing with sound is interesting, and how that relates to kind of the absurdity of modern life and some of the alienation that you can feel in like the new city and the new suburbs. He kind of something about it captures that alienation here. So that's Auteur Cinema. And to reflect on the end here, you'll notice that film history focuses on auteurs. So a lot of the theories that came about, well, first in the 20s and then especially here in the 50s, those became the basis for modern film history, and we are kind of doing film history in that vein by focusing on film as an art and focusing on those artists. And from the auteur perspective, what film history is appreciation of these auteurs and the belief that their art is a romantic belief that the beauty of art is timeless. So we can go back to these auteurs again and again, whereas some things of entertainment, they might have been entertaining at the time, relating to the context that they're in, but you go back to rewatch them again and they lose some of the humor. True art can stand on its own. This is the romantic idea, and especially for film history that's happening in universities, auteurs are great because they're interesting to study. There's a meaning to get at there that is ineffable, so we can watch it over and over again, and we can keep trying to translate it and pull some meaning out that's good for us. Or maybe we'll get tired with this filmmaker and might decide, oh, they're a lesser auteur, and we'll see who stands the test of time. These are interests of critics that then factor into how we do film history. We want to watch these movies over and over again because they're about style, so we're learning about the medium, but also about the experience of the time. They're complex, and they're open to serious discussion. It's precisely what they mean and whether they're important or not is what we debate and talk about, and what I look for from other people. There's not one final word on anything on art. It's a collective enterprise. That is Auteur Cinema.